What would you do if someone knocked on your door and told you that you were breaking rules you never agreed to? Worse, what if they demanded thousands of dollars in fines for living your life exactly as you always had? That was the situation I found myself in one crisp autumn afternoon when a sharp, authoritative knock rattled my front door. It wasn't the friendly kind of knock. It wasn't a neighbor asking to borrow sugar or a delivery driver dropping off a package. No, this was the kind of knock that made your stomach tighten, the kind that carried the weight of impending trouble. I wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, I immediately knew this wasn't going to be good. A man in an expensive-looking suit stood stiffly on my porch, clutching a thick folder behind him like it contained the fate of the world. And next to him, arms crossed, lips curled into a triumphant smirk, was Karen. Not just any Karen. The Karen. The self-appointed queen of the HOA, the scourge of the neighborhood, and the human equivalent of a car alarm that wouldn't shut off. My hand hovered over the doorknob, and for a brief moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home. But I already knew that wouldn't stop them. Karen wasn't the type to go away quietly. I sighed, bracing myself, and pulled the door open. "Mr. Walker," the lawyer began, adjusting his tie in an overly dramatic way, as if he were about to deliver the most important speech of his life. "I'm here on behalf of the Homeowners Association to formally notify you of your continued violations of community guidelines. You have ignored multiple notices, and legal action will be taken if you do not comply." Karen let out an exaggerated sigh, barely able to contain herself. "Let me make this simple, since you clearly have trouble following rules. You live in this neighborhood, which means you are subject to our regulations. And we do not tolerate rogue property owners thinking they can just do whatever they want." She gestured broadly, as if she were speaking on behalf of the entire country. I crossed my arms, looking from the lawyer to Karen and back again. "You do realize," I said slowly, "that I don't belong to the HOA, right?" The lawyer cleared his throat, flipping through his documents. "Our records indicate." "Your records are wrong," I interrupted. "I own this property outright. It was built before this neighborhood even existed. Your HOA was formed after that. I never signed up, never agreed to anything, and as much as I enjoy these little visits from your enthusiastic board members, your rules don't apply to me." Karen's smirk widened, like she had just caught me in a trap. "Oh, you're one of those people. You think just because you don't want to be part of the HOA, you can just live here for free? That's not how this works, sweetie. The moment you moved in, you agreed to our rules. That's how civilization works." I rubbed my temples, already feeling a headache forming. "Karen, do you hear yourself? You're saying that just by existing on this land, I'm somehow bound to an organization I never joined? That's like walking into a random gym and demanding people pay membership fees just because they're standing inside." The lawyer, sensing this was going sideways, attempted to regain control. "This is not a matter of personal preference. The HOA has authority over this community, and we have legal documentation that states." "Legal documentation that means nothing to me," I cut in. "Show me one document where I signed anything binding me to your HOA." Karen scoffed. "It doesn't matter if you signed anything. The rules are the rules." That was it. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The sheer absurdity of the situation hit me all at once, and before I could stop myself, I burst into laughter. Not a polite chuckle. A full-bodied, uncontrollable laugh. Karen's face turned red. "Why are you laughing?" "Because this is insane," I said between breaths. "You're standing here with a lawyer trying to intimidate me into following rules that don't even apply to me. And you actually think this is going to work?" The lawyer, now visibly uncomfortable, looked down at his papers as if he were suddenly reconsidering all his life choices. Karen, however, wasn't about to back down. "This will work because I have the full support of the HOA. We've already voted to impose fines, and if you don't pay them, we will put a lien on your property. That stopped my laughter immediately. My expression darkened. A lien? I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. On my property? Karen crossed her arms. That's right. If you don't pay your fines, we'll take action. I took a step forward, my eyes locking onto hers. Karen, you can't put a lien on something you don't own. That's not just wrong. That's illegal. The lawyer shifted awkwardly. Well, that's a matter of interpretation. No, it's not, I said flatly. And if you actually try to do something like that, I will take legal action against both the HOA and you personally. Karen's smug expression wavered, but she still had that glint of delusional stubbornness in her eyes. You think you're so clever, she sneered. But the HOA always wins. We'll see how tough you are when you're drowning in fines. I sighed and took a step back. All right, Karen. You do whatever you think you need to do. Just don't cry when it backfires. And with that, I shut the door in her face. Not 2 seconds later, I heard Karen shriek, "Did he just slam the door on me?" I walked away, shaking my head. This was just the beginning. If Karen thought she could bulldoze me into submission, she was in for a very, very rude awakening. The next morning, I stepped outside to grab the newspaper, only to stop dead in my tracks. A thick envelope was taped aggressively to my door, the HOA's official logo stamped in bold at the top. The same logo that had been slapped on the ridiculous fines they had sent before. But this wasn't another petty violation notice about my driveway color or my trash bins being visible for too long. No, this one had weight to it, the kind of weight that told me Karen had escalated things to a whole new level. I tore it open, scanning the contents, and my stomach twisted with fury. Congratulations, Mr. Walker. As of last night's emergency HOA board meeting, your property has been officially absorbed into the Homeowners Association. You are now a dues-paying member, effective immediately. I clenched the paper in my fist. They had voted me into their stupid, corrupt organization, without my consent. A smug note at the bottom, no doubt written by Karen herself, stated that I owed the HOA $8,000 in back dues for the years I had refused to comply. And if I failed to pay? The threat of a lien on my home loomed over the final paragraph. I exhaled sharply, willing myself to stay calm. They couldn't actually do this. This was beyond HOA nonsense, this was fraud. Karen, of course, was watching. I heard her exaggerated tisk from across the street before she strutted over, arms folded. Oh, Ethan, she sighed dramatically, tilting her head. I don't know why you insist on making this harder than it needs to be. I held up the letter. You held a vote? Without me there? Karen's smirk widened. We followed the proper process. The board made a unanimous decision. You live here, you follow our rules. I took a deep breath. This is illegal, Karen. You can't force someone into a contract they never agreed to. Karen waved a hand dismissively. Oh, I think you'll find that's debatable. But if you're so certain, feel free to take it up with our legal team. She nodded toward the lawyer from yesterday, who was watching uncomfortably from a distance. He had the look of a man questioning his life choices. I was about to tell Karen exactly what I thought of her HOA dictatorship when a city inspector's van pulled up in front of my house. Karen turned to them with theatrics worthy of an Oscar. Oh, thank goodness you're here. I was worried about the structural hazards on this property. Structural hazards? My gut tightened. I had a bad feeling about this. The inspector, clipboard in hand, approached me. Sir, we've received a complaint about your property violating municipal code. What complaint? I asked sharply. The inspector glanced at his clipboard. multiple anonymous reports of illegal modifications and environmental hazards. I nearly laughed. You're telling me someone claimed my property was an environmental hazard? The inspector sighed, flipping through his notes. The shed in your backyard doesn't appear to be permitted. You may be in violation of city zoning laws. The shed. The same shed that had been here for years without issue. I didn't even have to guess who filed the complaint. Karen stood behind the inspector, pretending to look concerned, but the gleam in her eyes betrayed her excitement. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, Ethan, she said in her most insincere voice. But we just can't ignore these kinds of violations. It's about community safety. I clenched my fists. That shed has been here longer than you have. The inspector shrugged. If it's unpermitted, we might have to issue a fine or even order its removal. I inhaled slowly, reminding myself that throwing Karen's entitled self off my lawn wouldn't help my case. I'll deal with the city, I muttered, already pulling out my phone to call my lawyer. But Karen wasn't done. As if she had a checklist of pettiness, she moved on to her next attack. That night, I let Buddy out into the yard like I always did, but when I went to call him back in, he was gone. Panic shot through me like ice water. Buddy never wandered. He was a golden retriever, loyal to a fault. I searched the yard, then the street, calling his name, dread creeping into my gut with every passing second. I was halfway to grabbing my car keys to start driving around when I got a call from the local animal shelter. Mr. Walker? We have your dog. Relief crashed over me, but it was short-lived. I hurried over, but when I asked how they found him, the worker behind the desk frowned. He was reported as a stray and a public nuisance. Someone called it in and signed a complaint. A sinking feeling settled in my chest. Who signed it? The worker hesitated, glancing at the report. Karen Matthews? Of course. I felt my jaw tighten. Karen had tried to get my dog taken away. I managed to get Buddy back, but as I walked out of the shelter, fury burned in my chest. This wasn't just about rules or property lines anymore. This was personal. But Karen still wasn't finished. The next day, while I was drinking my coffee, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. The subject line made my stomach drop, HOA Legal Action, Restraining Order Notice. I skimmed the document, barely believing what I was reading. Karen had gone to the county court and filed a restraining order against me. Her claim? That I had been harassing her. That I had threatened her multiple times. That she feared for her personal safety. Attached to the file were edited security cam screenshots from HOA meetings. She had chopped up footage, taking out of context clips to make it look like I was yelling at her, intimidating her. The final kicker? The order stated that I had to stay 50 feet away from her. Which meant I couldn't even step on parts of my own front lawn. Karen had flipped the script, and now, I was the one being treated like a criminal. She had made her move. But she had underestimated me. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning started like any other. Coffee in hand, I stepped onto my front porch, expecting the usual routine, maybe another ridiculous HOA letter, maybe Karen lurking in the distance, waiting for her next move. But as I took my first sip, something caught my eye. A bright red and white sign sat squarely in the middle of my front lawn. For sale. For a long moment, I just stared at it. This had to be some kind of joke. But no, the realtor's number was real, printed in bold beneath the sign, right next to my own home address. My stomach tightened. I didn't list my house. I marched straight to the sign, yanked it out of the ground, and stormed inside, already dialing the real estate company. A chipper voice answered. Hello. Dawson Realty, how can I help you today? I forced my voice to stay calm. Yeah, I need to know why there's a "for sale" sign on my lawn when I never put my house on the market. A pause. I heard keys clicking on a keyboard. Oh. You must be Mr. Walker. Yes, I see your property listing right here. It was filed through the Homeowners Association. Looks like you've already got some interest. An offer is pending, actually. I nearly dropped the phone. Pending? My voice came out sharper than I intended. There's an offer on my house? How is that even possible? Well, the realtor said hesitantly, according to the HOA, they have the right to list the property due to unpaid dues and non-compliance with community regulations. Karen. This was Karen's endgame. The phony fines, the forced enrollment, the restraining order, it had all been building to this. She was trying to force me out of my own home. I took a deep breath, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. Listen carefully. The HOA has no authority over my property. They don't own it, I never joined, and I owe them nothing. You're about to sell a house that legally isn't for sale. That's real estate fraud. The realtor was quiet. I could hear the nervous realization sinking in. I think I need to check with our legal team. You do that, I said, hanging up. By the time I stepped back outside, Karen was already there. She stood at the edge of my driveway, arms folded, watching me with pure, unfiltered satisfaction. I held up the "for sale" sign. Want to explain this? Karen barely blinked. Oh, that? Just business, Ethan. You refused to comply, so we took the necessary steps. You tried to sell my house. Without my permission. Karen tilted her head. Well, technically, it's not your house anymore. Since you never paid your HOA dues. I took a step forward, and for the first time, Karen stepped back. I had never seen her flinch before. You listen to me, I said, voice low, steady, but sharp enough to cut glass. You're done. You've crossed the line. You have no idea what you've just done. Karen scoffed, regaining some of her smugness. Oh, please. What are you going to do? Call the cops? Good luck with that, I have a restraining order against you, remember? I exhaled through my nose. She thought she had one. And that was her mistake. I didn't call the police. I called the media. 30 minutes later, the first local news van pulled up. Then another. And another. Karen's face paled as a reporter stepped out, microphone in hand. Mr. Walker, can you confirm the allegations that your homeowners association attempted to illegally sell your home? I didn't even have to answer. Karen tried to bolt. But she didn't get far. Because that's when my lawyer arrived. And Karen was about to learn, in the worst way possible, that when you try to take everything from someone, they will make sure you lose everything in return. The courtroom was packed. The tension in the air was thick, the kind that made people sit up straighter and hold their breath. Reporters whispered among themselves, cameras poised, waiting for the moment this scandal would explode in real time. And at the center of it all, sitting across from me at the defendant's table, was Karen, visibly flustered for the first time in her life. Gone was the smug confidence she had wielded like a weapon. Gone was the self-satisfied smirk that she had worn through every ridiculous interaction we'd had. No, now she was shifting in her seat, adjusting her blazer, her fingers gripping the edge of the table like she was trying to hold on to the last shreds of her power. She knew she had lost control. My lawyer, Rick Calloway, sat beside me, calm and collected, flipping through the meticulously organized case file that detailed every fraudulent document, every fabricated fine, every bogus legal action Karen and her HOA had attempted to pull. He barely looked concerned, because we both knew this was over before it had even begun. All rise, the bailiff called out, and the judge entered, an older man with sharp eyes that skimmed the case file before him. He adjusted his glasses, exhaling through his nose as he looked at the stack of paperwork Karen's HOA had filed against me. His frown deepened. Not a great start for them. The proceedings began, and my lawyer wasted no time. He laid out everything in a methodical, devastating order. First, he presented my property deed, proving that my land had never been part of the HOA. That should have ended the case right there. Then, he exposed Karen's secret HOA meeting, where they had falsified a vote to enroll me without my consent. Then came the fabricated city complaints about my shed, the illegal attempt to tow my car, the fake restraining order that prevented me from even walking on my own property, and finally, the fraudulent sale of my house. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of papers being shuffled as the judge flipped through them, his expression darkening with every page. Then it was Karen's turn to defend herself. And that's when it got painful. She started strong, her voice steady, that familiar self-righteous tone creeping in. "Your Honor, this man has been a menace to our community. He refuses to follow our neighborhood's guidelines, and we only acted in the interest of maintaining order." The judge's eyebrow twitched. "Order," he repeated, flipping to the restraining order documents. "Mrs. Matthews, you filed a false police report stating that Mr. Walker was harassing you. Can you explain why security footage from the very same day shows you standing outside his house, waiting for him to come outside?" Karen's mouth opened. Then closed. Then opened again. No words came out. The judge sighed, moving on. "And the fraudulent lien you placed on his home, did you or did you not knowingly sign a document stating he owed the HOA back dues, despite having full knowledge that his property was never legally part of the association?" Karen blinked rapidly. "Well, Yes or no, Mrs. Matthews?" Silence. By the time my lawyer played the recording of our last conversation, where Karen openly admitted she didn't have a legal claim but insisted I had to follow the rules, because that's just how communities work, she looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. But it was the house sale that sealed her fate. The judge leaned forward, his voice low and filled with barely contained fury. "Mrs. Matthews, do you understand that attempting to sell a property you do not own is not just an HOA overreach? It is real estate fraud. A felony." Karen's face drained of all color. That was the moment she realized she wasn't just losing a court case, she was about to lose everything. Rick, my lawyer, didn't even look triumphant. He didn't need to. This was a massacre. The ruling was swift and brutal. The HOA's fraudulent lien? Immediately invalidated. The illegal restraining order? Dismissed and flagged as an abuse of the legal system. The fines and violations? Wiped away. The attempted sale of my house? Enough to slap both Karen and the HOA with hefty fines and legal consequences. Then came the final blow. "Given the nature of this case," the judge said, his tone firm, "and the repeated baseless legal actions taken against the plaintiff, I am issuing a permanent restraining order against Mrs. Matthews. She is to have no further contact with Mr. Walker, directly or indirectly, regarding any HOA-related matters." I heard a loud, dramatic gasp from Karen. She looked personally offended, like the judge had just sentenced her to exile. But I am the one who has been harassed," she sputtered. The judge merely banged the gavel. "Case closed." Karen shot to her feet. "You can't do this. I am the HOA." No one listened. Because, at that moment, she wasn't the queen of the neighborhood anymore. She was just a defeated, powerless Karen. The aftermath of Karen's downfall was glorious. By the time the court ruling was made public, the entire neighborhood knew what had happened. The HOA, now facing massive fines and legal scrutiny, wasted no time in distancing themselves from her. A week later, they held an emergency vote, this time, not in secret. The result? Karen was removed from the HOA board permanently. The very organization she had ruled with an iron fist turned on her the second she became a liability. Her reputation crumbled overnight. The people who had once tolerated her nonsense, the ones who had nodded along while she imposed ridiculous rules about trash cans and lawn heights, now wanted nothing to do with her. I'd see her in town, pushing her shopping cart down the grocery aisle, and people would suddenly remember they had something to grab from the other side of the store. At community events, she'd sit at a table alone, pretending to be engrossed in her phone, while everyone else acted like she didn't exist. And then there was my favorite part. About a month after the trial, I was checking my mail when I found an official letter from the HOA. My first instinct was to laugh, what now? But as I opened it, I realized it wasn't another violation, another fine, or another attempt to drag me into their nonsense. It was something else entirely. A formal apology. Signed by the new board members, it acknowledged that the previous administration had engaged in unethical and legally questionable actions, and assured me that I would never be bothered again. They even included a gift card, a small, pathetic attempt at a peace offering. I stared at it for a moment, then tossed it onto the counter with a chuckle. I had fought Karen's reign of terror and won. My property remained mine, my rights intact, and best of all, I never had to hear her screeching about community standards ever again. But Karen? She learned a harsh lesson. She had spent months trying to crush me, convinced she could bully and manipulate her way into power. But in the end, she had only destroyed herself. Now, she was just another bitter ex-HOA dictator, a cautionary tale of what happens when you push too far. And honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better ending. Have you ever felt powerless against an HOA, or a Karen? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.